All right, well, so welcome everyone to our second webinar for Internships in the Valley. This time, it'll be a slightly different flavor. We'll be tackling everything about your application. So what you can see now currently on the screen is the agenda for today. So first I'll be rehashing what our program is about, and then we'll go into all the submissions in the Google form. So thanks everyone that submitted on that. And that'll tackle the application form, the short answer questions, the resume writing, and then thinking also beyond the application. And then we'll round off with a Q&A session again, just like last time. So in the interim, if you can already put your questions in the chat or in our Q&A section, that would be great. All right, so just before we kick off, this is slightly different because it's not webinar format. So like I just said, so drop your questions in the chat and the Q&A section that we have. If you do want to speak up, please raise your hand and then we can unmute you. And yeah, so please do mute yourself. This is being recorded, so it would be a bit frustrating if we do have a cat in the background or something. Yeah, as I said, the session is recorded. So if you want to ask a question anonymously, then you can also just put in the chat directly to either myself or Deborah in the message section. And yeah, feel free to interact. This is supposed to be a bit more of an interactive session. So if you do have a question and yeah, want it to be answered, then please do raise your voice. Right. So a bit more about Internships in the Valley again. So Internships in the Valley offers paid internships. So we've come to an agreement with our talent partners that your compensation will be a minimum of at least $3,000 a month. And that's important to note that this compensation is only a minimum, and it ultimately does depend on what role you will be and what type of company you will be entering in, and that it will be negotiable later on. The whole beauty of this program is that it's a tailored matching process. So we personally review your application, and yeah, we have our own tailored matching platform, as you already probably know at this point in time. And yeah, there will be an extensive interview process so that we do actually end up matching you with the internship that you want. Finally, yeah, we have our visa support system where we support you with our visa applications and pre-departure preparations. And last but not least, what's also the beauty of this program is that we have a really good relationship with the Dutch consulate in San Francisco, and they will be providing networking events throughout your internships. So that gives you a good overview of what we have on offer. These are our universities that we affiliate with. They are all part of the VSNU, so the Dutch Association Universities in the Netherlands. And at this point in time, these are our talent partners that we've had in the past. And as always, it's very important to note that these are just companies we've affiliated with in the past while, but this is not a restricted list and will definitely be expanding, depending on what kind of applications we get and yeah, what this next year will bring in terms of COVID as well. All right, and just quickly to rehash, so this is what our selection procedure looks like again. So we are currently in the application stage. So that's now from the 15th of September to the 1st of November. Here we approve applications on a regular basis, or at least accept or review applications rather. And then you get access to the application platform. And after the deadline, we then enter our first round of selections, which is then followed by our matchmaking process. And then sometime next year, hopefully you'll be matched with a talent partner. All right, so I'm sure you're all very curious. So these are our numbers so far. So we have had 565 open applications. That was already checked this morning, and I already checked later, and it was more than that. So that's across all universities. And at this point in time, we have 48 submissions across all universities. And from our last webinar, we had 120 attendees. So a very active group of applicants. Thank you guys, really appreciate it. And I think this is the perfect time for me to also announce that please, 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 can you submit your application well before the deadline? It gives us a chance to also review it, see if there are any mistakes. And you might end up in the swarm of 500 something applications if you submit on the deadline, whereas now I can still give you a good overview of whether you're on the right track. So please do submit. And then this is, I guess, what we're going to be talking about today. So the eligibility and application documents. So yeah, as you well know, so we're tailored for master's and PhD students that are currently enrolled at a FASNU affiliated university, or students that have recently graduated, so within 1 year of the start of the internship start date. And we require a minimum GPA of 7 and yeah, professional English language skills. And these are the application documents that we'll be discussing a little bit more today. So without further ado, let's go into the Google Form Insights. So again, thank you very much for submitting all your questions. It gives us also a very good overview of what we're dealing with. And here you can see, so most of you guys are master's students, current master's students, with some master's graduates and PhD students. And there, as I see, there is another section. I must emphasize that we are tailored for master's and PhD students or recent graduates. So if you are in the other section, please get in contact with me so we can confirm that you are indeed eligible. And then you can see we had a good spread of universities, which is always good to see. So really nice to see that every university, all the students are active. And you can see there's not an equal spread there, but I must emphasize here at this point that we are aiming to have a very equal distribution of students that we place for all our internship positions. So don't see this and think the UFA and the FU are going to get all the spots. We do strive to have an equal spread at the end of the day. And then the first question that was in the Google form was, which section are you feeling most uncertain about? Select a maximum of 3. And as you can see in the arrows here, the relevant skills, future growth, and brief motivation are the ones that I will now be tackling. And then Deborah will take over the supplementary documents to explain to you a little bit more what we would like from you. So short answer questions. So we had those 3 sections. So relevant skills. So in the description of the application form, it states, list your top skills. You may have gained these throughout your studies, your past internship experiences, volunteer work, events, etc. And the idea is that you want to be painting a full picture of yourself. So what combination of all these skills sets you apart from the rest? So together they should be painting a story. And yeah, it should give you a very clear idea of what you're capable of tackling. So what makes you stand out. So don't just think it's all the kind of, I don't know, the degrees or something that you've completed. It should be a bit beyond that. And it will likely also be a combination of soft skills and yeah, for example, coding, or it's a kind of a very tangible skill. In terms of future growth, the question stated, what would you like to gain from an internship in Silicon Valley? List what skills you would like to learn, improve on, and what experiences you would like to have. So this very much what you state here very much influences what type of companies or internships we will scout out for you. So be very honest about what you want, what skills you would like to be doing on a day-to-day basis during your internship. And just keep in mind that it's at the end of the day up to the company's discretion what position you will ultimately be placed. But here is an opportunity for you to very clearly state what you would like to gain from this on a very skill level, if that makes sense. And then finally, brief motivation. So it's essentially, in a nutshell, what's your story? What sets you apart? Why are you applying? Why should we pick you? This should, yeah, make it very short and snappy. We also have a motivational letter additional to this, but this should give a very quick overview of why you're here. So that's the idea, and that's why, yeah, it was also very limited in terms of word count. All right, and with that, I'll hand over to Deborah.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Wow, you guys are very active with all of the questions. Thank you. Keep them coming. That's how we like it. Maybe let's take a brief deep dive into the materials that we ask you to submit. Let's start with the difference between a resume and a CV. In the US, you have both a CV and a resume. In the Netherlands, we call both CV, curriculum vitae, typically. A CV in the US is more of a tabular structure. It lists all of your publications. It's more for scientific and academic purposes, and it is in chronological order. A resume is more about storytelling, is more about listing your skills, is more about condensing it to fit one, maximum 2 pages, typically 1 page. It goes more into, the dates that you were active at a certain role, and it lists the skills that you have. It doesn't really go into too much detail with regard to your publications. So it's just a slightly different setup that you work with. In our case, we really would like to ask you to work with a resume format. If you have already started making a CV format, or you've already uploaded that at this point, that's fine. We will definitely review it, but then you will be asked later on during the program to change it to a resume format to be put in front of the company. So at this point in time, it's both are fine, but we prefer the resume format to begin with. Then a resume do and don'ts. Do, what do you need to include versus what shouldn't you include? There are some cultural differences here with regard to the US compared to Europe. So do's are definitely include your contact details, your email address. That's super important. Also include maybe a link to your LinkedIn profile. We'll get to LinkedIn in a bit. Include a mini biography or a mini statement at the top of your resume where you tell a bit more about yourself. Who are you as a professional person? What kind of skills do you bring that are relevant to the program, and maybe, also to particular companies in the Bay Area that might be of interest to you? What are your objectives? Where do you want to go in life? What is your professional growth that you anticipate for yourself? And where does that program tie into that entire story? Also include your work experiences and the impact that you've made. So don't just list, for example, I was working as a customer support assistant at this company, but list what were your duties, what impact did you make at that company? Can you quantify maybe some of that? How many phone calls did you handle a day, for example, to the extent that it's relevant to the types of roles that you are looking at here in the Bay Area. Also include international experience if you've gathered any. That can be by means of travel, that can be by means of working at an international office or international company, that can be any other type of international exchange program that you've done in the past, and intercultural skills to the extent that you, for example, have been working with people from multiple backgrounds, because that will be a skill that we will be looking for as well. Also make sure to list your education, but mainly list the gained skills. So it's less interesting for us to know that you've studied, for example, marketing and communications. What is more interesting to us is then to hear which courses you think are most relevant for us to know. For example, if you are really good at digital media, if you're really good at editing, those are skills that you can then highlight there in that segment as well. Awards and certifications, definitely relevant to include. Then one that is big here in the US and maybe less so in Europe is volunteering experience. If you have any listed, it is super important to American employers to see that you are also, a contributing citizen. So if you don't have any volunteering experience, that's fine. You don't have to start a project right now. But if you do have any, definitely make sure to include it. Also extracurricular activities that can be of relevance. For example, if you were part of the track team and you did athletics at school or at college, and that taught you a lot about endurance, put that in there, but make sure that it has a sort of tie to the story that you're presenting on yourself. If, for example, like me, you really enjoy cooking, but it has nothing to do with the story that you're telling, then leave it out. Don't really go into detail into hobbies that much. Mainly focus on skills again. And we ask you to do it in reverse chronological order. So start with the most recent, both in terms of job experience or extracurricular experience, and also in terms of education, and work your way down the past like that. Use the US letter format. This is slightly different than the A4. If you already did it in A4, that's fine. But if you can set it up in Word to have a US letter format, that would be great. And make sure to also save it as a PDF so that everything shows correctly once we look at it. And make sure to include an up-to-date email address that also looks a bit professional. So don't tie it to your university address if that might be closed down in a few months' time and we can't reach you there no more. Also, don't use email addresses like happykitten@hotmail.com. Make sure that it's a bit more professional. And we see that quite often, actually. Then don't include your mail address. Don't include that you live in the Netherlands or in Europe at this point in time. Do not include a picture of yourself. Do not include your age or date of birth. Do not include your marital status. Do not include your ethnicity, race, or religion if these are not linked to the role that you want to do. If you're looking to do, for example, inclusion officer role or diversity management, then that might be of relevance. Or if you're looking to really work in a context that works with people of multiple backgrounds, then it might be relevant. Other than that, do not include it. Do not include your home country. Do not include your immigration status. Why not? All of these basically go against the Californian labor law and also US federal regulations, where employers should not be prejudiced when hiring people. And all of these can basically tie in with prejudices that employers could potentially hold to that extent. So try to stay clear from all of these. Do not list hobbies again if they're not relevant to the actual application. Do not go over 2 pages. And we would really like you to stick to 1 page for the resume at this point in time. And do not include extensive publications. You can add publications at an addendum once the companies ask for it, or you can really notate them very briefly in your statement on top to the extent that they're relevant. So we ask you basically to keep it short and snappy and to the point. Then we go to the motivational letter. What is the difference between a cover letter and a motivation letter? Maybe let's start with that. A cover letter will be what we will ask you to do in a few months' time, once you will be actually applying for a particular company and a particular internship position. Then you will write a cover letter for such a role. At this point, you're writing a motivation letter for a program this can also be for academic fellowships, or it can also be for unpaid positions. Our positions are all paid, don't worry, but it is a motivation letter that we are asking you to write at this point in time. Do's and don'ts. Do's, a motivation letter, half a page to 1 page maximum, 12-point and in standard font. Don't go too crazy with your letters in terms of formatting. Make them clearly legible to read. That's super important. Gain input from your network, maybe with regard to content. You can ask coworkers, managers, friends, how is my communication? What do you think an employer would, appreciate about me? So you can really personalize it. Do also research in advance the program that you're applying for. So have a look at our website so you know what we're looking for, and you can anticipate that and argue for the compatibility. What do you bring to the program? Where are you a good fit for us and for the Bay Area? And try to do that in a full circle structure. Start by that at the beginning and come back to that at the end. So you tie your entire letter nicely together like that. Include your skills, interests, goals, and ambition. Have your personality shine through a bit. I think that's always really nice to the extent possible. Proofread, don't have any typos in there, please. Use again the US letter format, and do include your contact details. You can include your phone number on both materials, but you don't have to. I would actually advise you at this point to only stick to your email address, but just make sure that you keep it to a very active email address. And also link it to your LinkedIn profile if you have one. Don't include again your don't include any general statements. For example, I'm a team player. Everybody says they're a team player. Why are you a team player? If you have relevant experience, for example, being your soccer captain, then that's super relevant, and explain that why you are a team player, what you've learned, and how you can apply that in a business setting. Avoid unnecessary jargon or buzzwords. especially I think we see that very often when it comes to, for example, more marketing roles. People really use the big buzzwords. I know SEO and all of that. I think that's super important, but maybe also highlight how you know that and how you've worked with that in the past to provide us with a bit more context. And don't use too many euphemisms. Really stick to the truth. Don't lie in any of your materials. That's super important, also for legal reasons. Then we go over to a very brief template. You find multiple ones of these online. Indeed.com, you will find as a good resource for materials. LinkedIn also has a lot online that you can use. So basically you start with dear Mr. or Miss. At this point, you can also say to whom it may concern if you don't know who you're addressing. And or dear program manager could also be applicable. You introduce yourself. You introduce what you are applying for. So you're applying basically for the internship in the Valley program. You then highlight a bit your motivation and also where you want to have that motivation take you in your professional career. Then why do you think you're an asset to the program? What skills do you bring to the table? And then you wrap it all up nicely. So you can experiment with these, but I think this could be a very good starting point. Then we go over to the very last part of your application, and that is references. We do not ask you to provide any references as such at this point in time. Employers, in this particular case, talent partners will be asking you to provide references once you're part of the interviewing process. Don't be surprised by that. References can be university professors. It can be somebody you've done a student job with in the past in the Netherlands. And this will mean that they will reach out to that person to ask them questions about your functioning and how they know you. So request that in advance with these people before you share their contact details, that it might be the person XYZ from company ABC can reach out to them to ask, about your character. So they're not surprised that they receive a phone call suddenly from the US. That's one. But at this point, we don't ask you for any of that yet. What we do ask you for is a letter of recommendation. So this is basically also already a type of reference at this point. We ask you for one, minimum one, you can add two, but one is really the go-to. Requested in time, because for example, a university professor needs time to prepare for this. Choose a professor, a former manager, a coworker, mentor, anybody that can speak to your development and professional growth, and have them focus on your skills and work culture in those materials. Then finally, your network is your net worth. That is a saying that we hear very often here in the Bay Area. That means grow your network while you're here in advance of coming here. You can do that online. You can look at Eventbrite and see what type of networking events they're hosting in the Bay Area that you can join in online. You can look at meetup groups. You can look at your own university, might actually have a chapter here in the Bay Area and might be hosting online events from time to time. So ask about that. And also you might be interested in using professional networking apps like Shaper. It's a sort of Tinder, but then for professional reasons. So it's not a dating app. Do not go on there with dating expectations. It is really to grow your network professionally, and it's a very good app. In person, we will be hosting Internships in the Valley events. We will have a kickoff event in the Netherlands before departure. We will be hosting multiple ones here in the Bay that you can come to. You will be able to join all of the Holland in the Valley events. You can ask your company if they host any events. So that's one way to grow your network. Another way to do that is by using LinkedIn, and that's on the next slide. We really recommend you to start preparing a LinkedIn profile in advance of coming here. It's basically your business card to the Bay Area. Not having a LinkedIn page in the Bay Area is pretty unusual. You can have very strong personal feelings about not wanting to be on LinkedIn, but I really advise you to start creating a page, to start growing your network with people that you know. If it's only in the Netherlands at this point, that's fine. Here you can include pictures, background information. You will be including a headline, skills, projects that you've been working on, and the impact that you've made. You can ask people for recommendations and endorsements and also hand them out to other people. But the key is to grow your network and to do your homework before or upon arriving in the Bay. Who are the people that you would like to connect with? What are you hoping to get out of those contacts? I think that's really important, as you will find that people are very open-minded to meeting up with interns here as well, to just grab a coffee with them and offer them advice and mentorship. So definitely use that. There are LinkedIn best practices that we've linked below that can be of help to you. And then that brings us to your pre-submitted questions at this point in time. So we will be dividing this Q&A section into two parts. The first one is the pre-submitted questions that we've received. And then the second one are the ones that you're all jotting down in the chat right now. So the first one is what advice we would give within or outside of the program to Dutch students or students at Dutch universities who want to obtain work experience in the US startup place. That's a great question. Basically, my main advice would be at this point, look what is out there in terms of companies, provide us with a short list so we can do the vetting if the company really qualifies as a good talent partner and as a good fit to the program. Make sure to have your LinkedIn in place. Make sure to brush up your English skills in advance of coming here as well. That can be by means of taking class, but also by means of, really reading a lot of English materials. And also just be very truthful throughout every step of the process. I think you'll find that a lot of Bay Area companies will find that very refreshing, that together with a very Dutch direct culture, I think that's also a very good fit very often here in the Bay Area. That brings us to the next question. What, according to us, is the competitive advantage of students from Dutch universities over hiring US students, and why are companies even interested in getting, specifically students from Dutch universities? Also great questions. The first one I would say is Dutch students or students at Dutch universities have a competitive advantage because they are multilingual. Most of the times they come from very highly ranked universities that are globally really in the top tier. They gather a lot of really cutting edge experience when it comes to, for example, emerging technologies, when it comes to, for example, AI, when it comes to, for example, space programs, when it comes to, for example, agriculture and food programs. I think those are really skills that are not that readily available here on the US market that Dutch students bring a competitive edge with, or students at Dutch universities. Why are companies interested in hiring potentially you as interns? Is, I think, because you come from outside, you're an out-of-the-box intern, and companies really love to learn also from you and to bring in a foreign perspective and incorporate that into their culture. So it's a mutual learning, it's mutual beneficial. So you'll find that a lot of companies are actually very open-minded to that. Brings us to the third question. What main skills are Silicon Valley companies looking for? Really depends on the company, but I think not really a skill, but more of a character. They're looking for somebody resilient, somebody independent, somebody that is very communicative, that will also, ring the bell if they've made a mistake and they don't know how to deal with it. I think it's all about being able to own what you're doing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, share about that, and just wanting to grow. I think that's more important to companies very often than particular skills, because those can also be gained still on the job. In terms of very often requested skills, I think we see a lot of marketing skills that companies are looking for, definitely in the digital realm. We see a lot of companies looking for emerging technologies. We see a lot of companies looking for, a very sound, for example, legal background that has a more international ring to it that they can incorporate. So pretty broad there, I would say. And then the fourth question was that in the online application form, we are basically asking for experiences that show your entrepreneurial and international attitude. And then international attributes that we're looking for. Basically, we want to see that you will be able to function in the Bay Area that you will be able to function in an American work setting, which is very different to a Dutch work setting in many ways. And that is thrilling. But if that's something that makes you very anxious, then maybe you might not be entirely ready to come yet at this point in time, or this would be something that you would need to discuss with your manager in advance to make sure that he or she really guides you properly throughout the entire process. So international experiences can be any type, can be that, for example, you come from an international background, you've spent time abroad, you've traveled abroad, or maybe this is your very first international experience, but you are looking forward to it. And you do think that you bring the necessary skills because other life experiences have taught you to be resilient and independent, and you bring an entrepreneurial drive. So you can argue in multiple ways about this, I would say. Michelle, would you like to add to this, or shall we proceed to the next questions?
Sorry, I realized I was still on mute. So I have nothing to add. Thank you. There was one question that I think would slip in really nicely to this though. And Arichia asked, could you elaborate on the US work setting versus the Dutch?
Yeah, good question. I think the US work setting is just structured a bit differently. I think you'll find that compared to Dutch, what are similarities is that very often it's a bit less hierarchical than in many other countries we see. You'll find that your manager here in the US is pretty approachable very often. You'll find that colleagues and managers will very often also lunch or go out for drinks after with their coworkers and the interns. I think a huge difference is that interns really are supported to a huge extent here in the Bay Area. They're really seen as an integral part of the team. They get a lot of responsibility, and they often work directly with a manager that is, for example, on a C-suite level. Whereas I would say in the Netherlands, maybe you will be part of a more junior manager's team. Whereas here you see that it's really more about that paying it forward culture. So I would say that in terms of internships, you are looking forward to a very open experience. I would say that's a difference. Another difference in terms of work context, I would say, is that here in the Bay Area, a lot has gone remote as well during COVID, more so than in the Netherlands. So it will be likely that part of your team will be working remote or will be working in different time zones in the US or in other countries. So that's also something that really also determines the interactions on the work floor, but in a very thrilling way, if you ask me. And that's also what we're doing today, right? I'm calling in from San Francisco. It is now 8:30 a.m. in the morning here. And I work very closely with my colleague, Michelle, in the Netherlands, and I'm thrilled to see you all here. So it's just smaller things, I would say, like that. Nothing that you won't be able to navigate, but I think you'll find it in very small ways. For example, in terms of communication style, that maybe, although American people really appreciate directness, I think that the Dutch direct culture sometimes might be a bit too direct for American counterparts. So I think that would be something that you might want to keep in mind as well.
All right, perfect. And then I think we have a whole bunch of questions still, but I think I'll round off the submitted questions and then we can dig into the questions in the chat. So the next couple of ones are more tailored towards the application form again. So this question is, how strict is the bachelor's grade minimum requirement of GPA above 7.0? We do ask you to just submit your most recent academic transcript of records. That does mean we do still prefer seeing the whole story, just because also then we can see what subjects you've done, what topics you've taken, particularly if you are doing a completely different master's and don't have any GPA, then we definitely want you to submit your bachelor's grade. It's not a hard requirement, as in we do want the most recent one to be above 7.0, but it's not, we will discount you if you're currently doing your master's and that's fine, but your bachelor's was slightly under. That doesn't discount you. It's the main message that we want to try to see here is we want to see that you're capable of taking on commitment, taking on pressure, working in tough conditions, and to some extent grades reflect that. So I think that's where we're coming from when we're asking for your GPA of a minimum of 7. Then the next question is, I expect to graduate in the first quartile of 2022, and I was wondering if you need to be a student at the start of your internship. The answer is no to that. You need to, you will have graduated for sure. And this is purely because of the visa requirement. We require you to start your internship. So the internship start date needs to be within a year of your graduation date. And then the answer to this will simply be, you can definitely still apply for sure. We're also very much tailored for people that have just simply graduated, because it is going to be quite tricky to incorporate a thesis into this, because we need to keep a supervisor happy, keep a university happy, and keep the talent partner happy. So for sure, definitely. Next question is, will companies be able to view my application already? So this has slightly changed, to be honest. So initially we had planned that companies would see, but now we will, companies will only be able to view your application, or your profile rather, once you've gone through the first selection stage. That doesn't mean that nobody sees your profile. Your university will see your profile as soon as you've submitted, and they will also, there's a university coordinator for each university, and they will also, be part of the selection process in a way. So it is also important that you brush up your profile section of your application in our application platform, just because that gives a very general view of what you're about besides the application form. So that's also particularly important for the university coordinators. But just to round it off, no, companies will only see your application after the first selection round. So that will be in December. And then the final question is, what English proficiency tests are required for the application? So at this moment in time, your application, so your letter of recommendation, your CV, all of those are proof enough for us that your English is proficient. And later, only after the first round of selection, and when we now need to consider you for a visa application, will we need you to also submit some form of proof. I actually there was one related question of, if you're doing a degree in English, do you still need to submit anything? I for example, don't have a TOEFL or anything. And actually round that off with Deborah, do they need a any sort of proof if they've done their entire graduation or the entire degree rather in English for the visa application now?
Yeah, so you will be asked to submit, your degree in English. So you will have a copy of your degree probably in Dutch. You can ask your university to translate that and to have an English copy of that. So we will ask you to have that copy ready for the J1 process. That's 1. 2, when it comes to particular English proficiency in general, if you, for example, have studied English, then that could suffice at this point in time. We will basically, as Michelle said, look at it based on the materials you've submitted at that point in time and on our interactions with you throughout the very first selection of students. But then if you have a TOEFL or any other English certificate, just upload it or mention it in your resume. If you don't, then our J1 visa sponsor company will probably schedule a brief language interview with you to see if you are proficient enough to function in an English language business setting. Was that what you were looking for, Michelle, that answer?
That's exactly it. So yeah, so just to summarize, at the moment for the application, you don't need any proof of English proficiency. If you do have it handy, then put it in one of the questions is other qualifications in the application form. Put it there as a bullet point. literally just describing the TOEFL or the grade or anything next to it, and when you got awarded it, and then we can take it from there. Then it's good for us to know. But yeah, as I said, now we're taking it on surface level, that if you are able to write a motivational letter and draft a CV that looks English proficient, then you're good to go. And yeah, so then now we are in the open question section. And thank you so much for being so active on the chat. It is a bit overwhelming not being able to have the nice Q&A from last time. So if we do miss your question, please also just send an email and I'll answer it as quickly as I can. But maybe I'll hand over to Deborah if she's found any ones she wants to start off with.
Definitely. Thank you so much. We're trying to tackle them all also throughout the session, the smaller ones, definitely. But I think Aisha Morris actually has two very relevant questions. Aisha, would you like to unmute yourself and provide a bit more context on the questions that you put in the chat, or do you want me to summarize them? Let's see. Are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm there. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question was on the website, it says about the letter of recommendation that your professor, for example, needs to explain why you have a entrepreneurial drive and innovative mindset. And I was wondering, does the letter have to be very specific, or can it be more broad? Or does your professor, for example, have to say, oh, Aisha did, for example, these things, so that is why she has an entrepreneurial drive, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's start with that one. Getting your professor to say something about you is not always that easy. So it will depend a bit on the professor that you ask to begin with. That's one. Two, I think professors do understand a bit what we're looking for in a program or a scholarship or a fellowship, in this case like this. Basically, we want them to testify to the fact how they've perceived you as a student in their class. And for example, if they've seen that you are very academically outstanding in your output, or that you are a very active and participating student, or for example, and these don't have to be ands, right? It can be one of those, or it can be that you take very easily initiative on you in terms of group work or teamwork, projects like that. I think all of those small aspects really show that you are a resilient person, that you have an entrepreneurial drive, or that you are, very academically, you have a very strong academic basis. So it can be argued for in multiple ways. It doesn't necessarily need to mean an entrepreneurial drive that we expect you to have your own company up and running. It can be shown in very, very many subtle ways like that. So I think try to have them incorporate something about you as a student and how they perceive you with regard to this broader picture. If in their letter of recommendation, this shines through maybe a bit less than you were hoping for, then you can still mention this in the brief statement on top of your resume. And you can also bring that into your own motivation letter as well, where you give examples of that as well. So don't be disheartened if the letter of recommendation by your previous manager or professor is maybe a bit more general than what you were hoping for at this point in time. And then Aisha, you also had a second question.
Let's see. I'm not sure if because you already answered the one about the entrepreneurial drive, that you don't need to have founded your own company, for example. Yeah, but I was wondering, because I also submitted a question earlier about law students and this program. I was wondering if there were law students in the past who have participated in this program.
No, that's also an excellent question that we've received a few times. So thank you for asking this. Law students, yes, you can participate in a program. There are a few things to be aware of, though. One is your internship needs to match your field of study. So either you do an internship at, for example, a legal tech company, or you are part of the legal team at a company, there needs to be a link to your course of studies there. That's one. You can't have studied law and then suddenly do a position where you only focus on, for example, coding, because the J1 visa won't allow you to do such a drastic change at that point in time. So there needs to be a continuity. Secondly, of course, law also can be very specific. It can be that you're very well adversed into Dutch law based on, the courses that you've chosen. In this particular case, don't be too disheartened. Again, I think if you're a bit open-minded about the types of internships that we can offer, then you can definitely proceed. If you are looking to do really your legal training here to become a barrister in the US, that's not part of this program. What we can offer you is, for example, an experience as part of a legal team at a company, or for example, a role as an advisor as a legal tech company, where, for example, you will be thinking with them how to make law applications more accessible to the broader public. So something like that, I think, works really well. And we've been able to do that in the past. So it also depends a bit on your flexibility at that point as well. But excellent question. Michelle, do we have other questions in the chat right now that we would like to address?
Yes, always. There was one that we said we would address at the beginning of the session, so I think it's about time we address it. And that is from Ruben, and that is it possible to do an internship while not being vaccinated? And I think, Deborah, you're more the person to answer this question.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that's an excellent question, Ruben. Indeed, I told you we would get back to it. So I'm glad that Michelle now brings it back up. At this point in time, we don't know yet what the requirements will be once the US will lift or ease its travel restrictions, which have been announced now for the month of November, throughout the course of the month of November. We also do not know yet if you will be starting your internship, let's say in spring 2022 or summer 2022, what the restrictions at that point in time will be. So it might very well be that vaccination status or the type of vaccination that you have received tie into gaining access into United States at that point in time. It might be that they don't tie in at that point. It's too early to tell. That's one. Secondly, in addition to travel restrictions, it can also be that your company requires you for a proof of vaccination at a certain point in time. It also depends a bit where your company is based. If your company is based in San Francisco, they are basically falling under different regulations to disclose the vaccination status of their employees at this point in time than companies that are, for example, based in Silicon Valley and are part of a different county. So when in doubt, reach out to us. At this point in time, I would just say vaccinated or unvaccinated. If you are interested in the program, just apply, and you can always send us an email about it as well. And then we can also inquire with future employers if that could be an issue, and we can really track it for you at that point in time. But at this point in time, it's open for everybody because we don't have any specific details to the matter yet.
All right, do you have any questions that you want to address now? I'm just busy in the middle of typing one answer, so. Well.
Maybe, we do get a lot of questions about the GPA. So maybe let's also address that very quickly again. Michelle?
Yeah. So that's actually literally the one I was busy typing out. So I think the confusion lies. So you need to submit one of the supplementary documents you need to submit is your proof of transcript. And then you also have two select lists. So for GPA in the application form. So one is asking what is your GPA for your master's and what's your GPA for your bachelor's. So, and as I'm sure many of you are in the situation, potentially you have just started your master's and you don't have any GPA behind your name for this current master's degree yet. Then we have in the select list under the master's, we have an option saying not applicable yet, not available yet, something to that end. So that's what you should then select. And then what you would then accordingly then submit under your documents is you would submit a proof of transcript for your bachelor's. But if you do have both available, then you submit both of them in the documents. So hopefully that makes it a bit clearer. we've just added a little bit more flexibility for those that have just started their masters and don't have any grades behind their name yet.
Agreed. And then I also see a very good question from Jumei Yang, who has actually a few questions. So if you're there and you're willing to maybe elaborate on your questions, we would now like to invite you to unmute yourself and turn on your camera to ask your questions.
Hey, I'm there. I'm here. Yeah. So I posted a few, like 2 questions in the chat, but I also fill in the Google form. Like there are like 7 questions there. Like which one do you prefer me to ask though?
Maybe, you had a question already about the fees of the program. Maybe we can start with that one and we can just work our way throughout your questions, because I think all of your questions are very applicable to everybody here today.
Okay. Yeah, the thing is, like, I watched the first webinar and still not the United States Immigrant Department will cover for us. So I would like to hear from you, be more specific on this issue of fees.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So thank you for asking that. Basically, we try to keep the program as inclusive for everybody. There's 2 ways that we go about this. The first one is your visa cost will be covered by your host company. So the J1 visa processing fee that our partner asks for, which is over $500, will be charged to our town partners, and the town partners will also pay the fee for the actual visa paperwork, which is between $1,000 and $2,000, which depends on the length of your internship period. So those fees are of non-concern to you. That's one. What is basically requested by the student to pay is a CVIS fee, which is, in order to file your paperwork, which is about $220, I think, currently. And then also the fee to make an appointment at the US consulate in Amsterdam. And that is, I think, about $160 last time I checked. So that will be falling upon the student. However, if you have trouble budgeting for this, reach out to us and we can definitely see what we can do to help you. That's one. Secondly is you will be required to pay for your own flight and also your own housing while you're here. We will have a paid internship position for you that should be able to pay you enough to really survive here and also still have a bit of fun as well. But in case you don't have, the funds readily available to budget for your return flights going back and from the US, and then also to pay, your first month rent or the Airbnb upon arrival, then reach out to us. We work with quite a few organizations that offer excellent programs for students that might need an extra push financially. So reach out to us. And I also advise you all to have a look at the NAF, the Netherlands America Foundation. We're a very good partner of ours who have the Dutch to USA program. And they also have particular deadlines there as well. So you could also apply for that program. And if they award you a fellowship, then you can combine that with the Internships in the Valley program. So that's another very concrete recommendation. And then you also had another question, Jumei, which was about non-EU students.
Yes, I would like to elaborate on that. So because it's like I will be graduate next year on March, and for our non-EU students, we have 1 search year visa we can apply for, so that we can make use of the 1 year opportunity to search for jobs. But if I successfully luckily I got the chance to go to the US, would that be a conflict that so that my you will be, some trouble for me to like also get the search your visa here in the Netherlands?
That's an excellent question, Shumei. We will look into that because I want to make sure that we give you the correct answer to this at this point. In my experience, I don't think it should necessarily interfere in a negative way, but we will ask our colleagues here at the consulate to look into that for you and get back to you with a more sound answer from our consular department. That's one. And we will also be in touch with the university coordinators to ask if they have any input on this. So thank you so much for your questions. Michelle, we have time for one last question or to wrap up the session. We have 1 minute left.
Oof, that's quite a lot of pressure. I'm still busy scrolling. I think one of this is quite interesting still. So Cindy asked, can we already expect a response about whether we are matched or whether we are considered for this program prior to mid-December? And my response to that would be no. We will announce it to everyone on the 15th, not to bias anyone and not to favor everyone. But I don't know, Deborah, if you have anything to add to that.
No, indeed. I think it's very hard for us to, first of all, make public which students we've retained for the final selection before we've had the time to go through all of the, hopefully, plus 500 profiles that we've received. That's one. We also want to make sure that we make very fair and just selection of the students. So that will take a few weeks' time. So December 15, we will be able to announce it. Internship start dates also won't be feasible still in the course of 2021 for the reason that also a lot of US companies, especially here in the Bay, are currently working on their going back to the office policies. So it is very likely and way more likely for us to have you placed in an internship role from spring 2022 onwards. Very exceptionally, I think we could start maybe mid-February if we get you a match already in December, and then you can schedule an interview and maybe you have good luck and you can go very quickly on your interview at the US consulate and you have your paperwork ready very quickly. Then mid-February might be possible, but I think realistically we're looking at March.
Yeah, and then I think with that, we will start rounding off the session. So again, thank you so much for all the questions. I've been furiously copy pasting them so that I can then put them into a big document and submit it later. I think the main takeaways are, one, please do submit your application ASAP. Then I can have a look at what you have so far and help you. If you submit it at the deadline, I cannot. Next is tailor your application, tailor your profile, tailor your LinkedIn, get that everything around it. Work beyond your application because you will be needing that later on. So yeah, for letter of recommendation, try get a professor to write something that's a little bit more tailored towards this program and not just for a PhD application, for example. And then, we will be matching all the universities. If you, regardless of which university you're at, you'll have a really good chance. And we strive to get everyone equal. And another important element that I think we need to emphasize is that we also want to have a balance between Dutch and international students. So there's no favor on either one or the other. And I think with that, as always, subscribe to our newsletters. Please finish your application, submit it soon, and then follow us on our socials so you get all the latest. And we have recorded the session, and I think we will be posting it on YouTube. So then you can also rewatch it soon. And then, as always, I'll also be posting the slides as well. So you'll have an opportunity to have a look at that. And I hand it over to Deborah. Any last words?
Thank you so much. We will get back to you with your questions. So you will be receiving either an individual email or you will see your questions pop up on the FAQ section on our website very, very soon. So thank you so much for your presence here today. And also thank you, of course, to Michelle for being here, to all the university coordinators for all of their dedication and time and support, and also to our wonderful events team here at the consulate who got up very early this morning to run this session. So thank you all.
Great.